the gateway to Europe. Imagine a map of the world 600 years ago. Europe was a collection of small, bickering kingdoms. But to the east, a new power was rising like a storm over the horizon: the Ottoman Turks. For centuries, the Balkan Peninsula, the rugged, mountainous land we now know as Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Bosnia, was the ultimate prize. Today, we are diving deep into the rise and fall of Ottoman power in the Balkans. This is not just a story of maps and borders. It is a story of blood, faith, architecture, and a clash of empires that lasted for half a millennium. This is the story of how a small group of nomadic warriors from Central Asia became the masters of Southeast Europe, and how that same empire eventually crumbled into the dust of history. The crossing of the Hellespont. The story begins in the mid-1400s. The Ottomans were already a force to be reckoned with in Anatolia, but they had their eyes on the west. The Balkans were the gateway to the riches of Europe. The first major shockwave hit in 1389 at the Battle of Kosovo. This is a date burned into the memory of the region. On one side, you had the Serbian prince Lazar. On the other, Sultan Murad I. It was a brutal, bloody stalemate that saw both leaders killed on the field. But the Ottomans had more resources. They had more men. Even though the battle was technically a draw, it broke the back of Serbian resistance. Then came the big one, 1453, the Fall of Constantinople. With the great city in their hands, the Ottomans didn't just have a capital, they had a launch pad. From here, the Balkans weren't just a neighbor, they were the front line. The Devshirme and the Janissary system. Now, how did the Ottomans keep control over such a massive, mountainous, and rebellious area? They did it through a system that was both brilliant and terrifying. It was called the Devshirme. Every few years, Ottoman officials would travel into the Balkan villages. They would take the strongest, most intelligent young Christian boys from their families. These boys were taken to Istanbul, converted to Islam, and trained in the highest levels of administration and warfare. These boys became the Janissaries. They were the elite shock troops of the Sultan. Think of them as the special forces of the Middle Ages. The irony is incredible. The very men who guarded the Sultan and conquered new lands for the empire were often the sons of the people they were conquering. This created a unique bond between the Balkans and the heart of the empire, but it also left a deep, lasting scar on the families of the region. The Golden Age of the Sultan. Under leaders like Suleiman the Magnificent, the Balkans flourished in a strange way. It wasn't all war and taxes. The Ottomans brought with them incredible architecture. If you go to Sarajevo or Mostar today, you can still see the beautiful stone bridges and the tall, slender minarets that define the skyline. The Ottomans were surprisingly tolerant for the time. As long as you paid a special tax called the jizya, you could usually keep your religion. This led to a fascinating mix of cultures. You had Sephardic Jews fleeing Spain who found a home in Thessaloniki. You had Orthodox Christians, Catholics, and Muslims, all living in the same winding streets of Balkan trading towns. For a couple of centuries, the Balkans were the most cosmopolitan place on earth. The first cracks in the armor. But no empire lasts forever. By the late 1600s, the Ottoman machine began to slow down. We just talked about the siege of Vienna in 1683. That was the turning point. When the Ottomans failed to take Vienna, the aura of invincibility was gone. The Great Turkish War followed, and for the first time, the Ottomans started losing chunks of Balkan territory. Hungary was lost. Parts of Croatia were lost. The border was moving backward. Inside the Balkans, things were changing too. The Janissaries, once the protectors of the state, had become corrupt and lazy. They were more interested in politics and business than in fighting. The central government in Istanbul was losing its grip, and local governors, called pashas, started acting like independent kings. The Age of Revolution. The 1800s were the beginning of the end. All across Europe, a new idea was spreading: nationalism. People didn't want to be subjects of a sultan in a far-off city anymore. They wanted to be Serbs. They wanted to be Greeks. They wanted to be Bulgarians. The Greek War of Independence in 1821 sent shockwaves through the empire. With the help of the British and the French, the Greeks won their freedom. This was the blueprint. One by one, the Balkan nations began to rise up. The Ottomans tried to modernize. They tried to give more rights to their subjects, but it was too little, too late. The empire was being called the sick man of Europe. The Russians were constantly pushing from the north, and the Austro-Hungarians were pushing from the west. The Balkans had become a giant powder keg, just waiting for a spark. The Balkan Wars and the final collapse. The end came fast, and it was violent. In 1912, the small Balkan nations did something nobody expected. They stopped fighting each other and formed an alliance. Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria, and Montenegro teamed up to kick the Ottomans out of Europe once and for all. This was the First Balkan War. In just a few months, the Ottomans were pushed back almost all the way to Istanbul. They lost nearly all of their European holdings. Families who had lived in the Balkans for 500 years were suddenly refugees. Then came World War I. The Ottomans chose the losing side. By 1922, the Sultanate was abolished. The empire was gone, replaced by the modern Republic of Turkey. The 500-year Ottoman era in the Balkans was officially over. The echoes of empire. So, what is the legacy of Ottoman power in the Balkans? You can see it in the food. You can see it in the music. You can see it in the architecture. But you can also see it in the conflicts. The borders drawn and redrawn during the fall of the empire created tensions that lasted well into the 1990s and even today. The rise was a masterpiece of military organization and cultural synthesis. The fall was a long, painful process of nationalism and global politics. But whether you look at the bridges of Bosnia or the ruins of Ottoman fortresses in Serbia, one thing is clear. The Ottomans didn't just occupy the Balkans, they became a part of its soul. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 5 centuries of history. This was the rise and fall of the Ottoman Balkans.